There are moments in the grim darkness of the far future when silence itself becomes a prayer, when the absence of sound is the only mercy the universe can offer. These moments occur in the heartbeat before a Daemon engine awakens, in that crystalline instant when the chains still hold and the wards still bind, when the screaming fury trapped within metal and madness has not yet been unleashed upon the material realm. For those who have witnessed what comes next, who have survived the awakening of these abominations, that silence becomes a memory they carry like a scar. A reminder that some horrors are worse than death, and that in the galaxy of the 41st millennium, damnation wears armor and walks on legs of brass and bone. To understand what happens when a Daemon engine awakens, we must first confront what these things truly are. They are not merely machines possessed by daemonic entities, though that description grazes the surface of their nature. They are not simple vehicles corrupted by the warp, though corruption runs through every rivet and plate. A Daemon engine is something far more terrible, far more deliberate in its blasphemy. It is the fusion of the material and the immaterial, a marriage of metal and malice, forged in the darkest corners of reality, where the laws of physics bend to accommodate nightmares. Each one represents a triumph of the dark mechanicum. Those tech, priests who abandoned the Emperor's light and the Omnissiah's wisdom to pursue forbidden knowledge in the workshops of the damned. These engines of war stride across battlefields throughout the galaxy, from the Eye of Terror, where reality itself weeps and bleeds, to the edges of imperial space, where hope still flickers like a candle in an endless night. They come in forms both familiar and alien. Some resemble twisted versions of imperial war machines, their lines corrupted and perverted until the very sight of them wounds the mind. Others bear no resemblance to anything forged by human hands, their shapes drawn from the fevered imaginations of entities that have never known mortality and care nothing for the limits of sanity or physics. The Imperium has catalogued dozens of varieties, from the spider, like defilers that scuttle across rubble on piston-driven limbs, to the dragon, like helldrakes that tear through the sky on wings that were once aircraft control surfaces, but have become something living and terrible. There are Molophines that hunt with the single-minded fury of predators given form in brass and iron, and Forgophians whose weapons spit not mere ammunition, but the crystallized fury of the warp itself. The Death Guard fields for weighted bloat, drones that drift through the air like armored plague flies, while the disciples of Khorne unleash Lord of Skull's Daemon engines, so massive they shake the earth with every grinding step. Their fuel tanks filled with the boiling blood of murderers, their armor festooned with the skulls of countless victims. But before we can truly comprehend the awakening, we must understand what these machines are in their dormant state, and more importantly, how they came to exist at all. For the creation of a Daemon engine is an act of such profound violation that it makes the corruption of a human soul seem almost merciful by comparison. The unholy genesis, the forges where Daemon engines are born, exist in places where the barrier between reality and the warp has worn thin enough for madness to seep through like poison through rotted wood. The most infamous of these is the Forge of Souls, located in the formless wastes of the realm of chaos itself, a nightmare foundry perpetually cloaked in a pall of black, oily smoke and dominated by the wailing of uncountable tortured spirits. Here, blind and ever, mutating Daemon craftsmen work the forges, while their black fires are fueled by the souls of the damned, and colossal screaming bellows are manned by legions of semi-sentient nightmare creatures. But the Forge of Souls is only the most prominent. Scattered throughout the Eye of Terror, and wherever chaos holds sway, lesser forges burn with unholy purpose. On Daemon worlds where the laws of physics are mere suggestions and reality itself can be reshaped by will and worship, the Dark Mechanicum maintains workshops where the screaming of metal mingles with the screaming of souls. These are the Hell Forges, the Salt Forges, places with names that even speaking aloud can draw unwanted attention from entities best left undisturbed. The creation of a Daemon engine requires a tripartite blasphemy, a coming together of three distinct practitioners of the dark arts. First, there must be a sorcerer or dark apostle, one who has studied the forbidden rituals necessary to tear open the veil between worlds and reach into the warp itself. This individual's role is to weaken the fabric of reality, to create a portal through which a daemon may be drawn. The incantations they speak are older than human civilization, words that were never meant to be uttered by mortal tongues, phrases that cause the air itself to writhe and twist as if in pain. Second, there must be a warpsmith, a master of the unholy fusion of technology and sorcery that the Dark Mechanicum practices. Where the Adeptus Mechanicus of the Imperium seeks to honor the machine spirit through ritual and prayer, the warpsmith seeks to dominate it, to bend it to purposes that make a mockery of its original design. The warpsmith's role is to provide the mechanical shell into which the daemon will be bound, and to set the warding chains and runes upon it so that the daemon cannot escape or turn upon its wood, be masters. This is no simple task. The shell must be prepared with exacting care, its every component inscribed with symbols of binding and domination, its structure reinforced to contain energies that were never meant to exist in the material realm. Third, there is often a dark apostle of the word bearers, or another devotee of chaos undivided, whose role is to entreat the ruinous powers and bind the daemon to the sorcerer's ferocious will. This individual serves as a bridge between the material participants and the entities of the warp, negotiating with powers that view mortal concerns with contempt and hunger. The ritual itself is costly in the extreme. Each step involves the shedding of innocent blood, the invocation of unspeakable powers, the offering of sacrifices both willing and unwilling to entities that feast on suffering. Dozens of machine thralls are lost with the creation of each daemon engine, their bodies torn apart by the energies unleashed, their souls dragged screaming into the warp to sweeten the bargain. Dark adepts who assist in the process often meet similar fates, their expertise and devotion worth less than nothing to the powers they serve, when measured against the cosmic appetite of the warp, and the danger extends to the primary practitioners themselves. Any misstep, any weakness of resolve, any misspeaking of the ritual incantations can bring doom to all involved. At the least, the summoning will fail, bringing down the ire of whatever warlord commissioned the work. At worst, the daemon will come forth unbound, or will possess one of the three conjurers, and violence unimaginable will be unleashed upon the forge and all who dwell within it. When the ritual succeeds, the daemon is dragged from the warp against its will. This is crucial to understanding the nature of daemon engines and the fury that drives them. Unlike the rituals of demonic possession, where a daemon might willingly enter a mortal host to experience the pleasures and pains of the material realm, the binding of a daemon into an engine is an act of enslavement. The entities bound within these machines are prisoners, trapped in cages of metal and ceramite, sealed within by chains fashioned from scrimshod bone and ropes woven from the hair of murderers. They are dragged biting and screaming into the flame-hearted citadels of the Dark Mechanicum, their essence forced into forms that resist their every attempt at manipulation. The lore speaks of nooses woven from materials so profane their very existence is an affront, of chains that burn with cold fire that can bind even the essence of a warp entity. Beyond the soul forges of the Imperium, warp entities are caught in these implements of captivity and hauled across the barrier between dimensions. The process fills the daemon with an unreasoning hatred for the material universe in which it finds itself imprisoned, a fury so pure and absolute that it becomes the engine's primary driving force. In the molten heat of the dark forges, the warpsmiths trap the screaming daemons within the rune, bound hulls of the giant metallic beasts they have created or captured. The daemon's essence spreads throughout the machine's circuits and structure, corrupting everything it touches, transforming lifeless metal into something that pulses with malevolent awareness. But the corruption is a prison as much as a transformation. Every rivet, every bolt, every weld becomes both a part of the daemon's new body and a bar in its cage. The newly created daemon engines must then be bludgeoned into submission. They thrash against their restraints, their weapons firing wildly, their limbs tearing at anything within reach. Machine Thralls are sent in with heavy chains and warding staffs, many dying in the process, crushed beneath mechanical limbs or torn apart by weapons that should not yet be active. The Daemon engines roar, with voices that blend mechanical grinding with otherworldly screaming, a sound that can drive unprotected humans to madness. They must be beaten down, contained, chained until the time when they will be unleashed upon the enemy. This is the state in which Daemon engines spend much of their existence, dormant but never truly asleep. Their consciousness trapped within metal shells, their hatred building like pressure in a sealed vessel. Understanding this dormant state is essential to comprehending what happens when the chains are finally released. The chains of captivity between battles. Daemon engines are kept in a state that can barely be called rest. They are chained in the deepest holds of chaos warships, in the darkest vaults of corrupted forge worlds, in pens constructed specifically to contain their fury. The chains that bind them are not merely physical restraints, though those certainly exist in the form of massive links of blessed, cursed metal, each one inscribed with runes of binding and domination. The chains are also metaphysical, woven from the same dark sorcery that initially bound the Daemon into its mechanical prison. These containment areas are among the most dangerous locations on any vessel or installation controlled by the forces of chaos. Even chained, even supposedly dormant, the Daemon engines radiate an aura of pure malevolence. Mortals who venture too close without proper warding report nightmares that last for weeks. Visions of mechanical mouths opening to devour them, of being crushed beneath piston-driven limbs, of being torn apart by weapons that hunger for their flesh. Some go mad from brief exposure, clawing at their own eyes, or throwing themselves from high places to escape the psychic pressure of the Daemon's confined rage. The Daemon within can sense the material world around it, though its perception is filtered through the machine, senses of its prison body. It sees in spectrums that mortal eyes cannot detect, hears frequencies that would shatter human eardrums, tastes the emotional emanations of nearby living things like a predator tasting fear on the wind. And it hates. The hatred is not merely an emotion, but a fundamental state of being. A rage so pure and all-consuming that it becomes a kind of dark enlightenment. The Daemon hates the material universe for being solid and fixed when it is accustomed to the ever-changing tides of the warp. It hates the machine that imprisons it for being lifeless and rigid when it wants to flow and change. It hates its creators for binding it, hates the enemy it will be sent against for existing, hates itself for being trapped. This hatred builds with every moment of confinement, accumulating like pressure in a boiler with no release valve, growing hotter and more desperate with each passing second. Some Daemon engines are kept in this state for years, even decades. The longer they remain bound, the more their fury grows, until the Daemon within has been compressed into something so dense with rage that when it is finally released, the resulting explosion of violence is almost incomprehensible in its intensity. The warpsmiths and sorcerers who maintain these prisons must constantly reinforce the wards and strengthen the chains, for the Daemon never stops testing its bonds, never stops seeking the smallest weakness it might exploit. There are accounts of Daemon engines breaking free from their restraints while still in storage, unleashing carnage upon their supposed masters before rampaging through whatever structure contained them. These incidents are suppressed whenever possible, for they reveal a fundamental truth that even the most devoted servants of chaos would prefer to ignore. The Daemon engines are as much a threat to those who wield them as they are to the enemy. They are weapons that would gladly murder their makers if given the chance, tools that despise the hands that use them. The physical condition of a dormant Daemon engine varies depending on its design and the nature of the Daemon bound within it. A defiler might squat on its 6 legs like a massive mechanical spider, its weapons pointing in seemingly random directions as the Daemon within shifts its attention from potential target to potential target. A Helldrake might hang from chains attached to a warship's hull like a bat, its wing surfaces folded, but twitching with suppressed violence, its serpentine neck moving in slow, searching patterns. A Lord of Skulls sits like a malevolent idol, its massive cleaver held at rest, but somehow still threatening. Its weapons systems cycling through targeting protocols, even when no targets are present. The containment vessels that some Daemon engines possess add another layer to their dormant state. These warded and chained containers, often aglow with fell energies, hold the Daemon's essence in a state of compressed fury. The exact nature and purpose of these devices remains largely mysterious to Imperial observers, but they appear to serve as focal points for the binding rituals, anchoring the Daemon to the machine in a way that makes separation nearly impossible. When a Daemon engine bearing such a vessel is destroyed, the container often shatters in a burst of warp energy, releasing the Daemon back to its home dimension in a psychic scream of rage and frustration. The preparations for deployment begin long before the actual awakening. Tech priests of the Dark Mechanicum perform their twisted versions of the rites of activation, anointing the Daemon engine with unclean oils, burning incense made from corrupted sacred materials, chanting prayers that are mockeries of those spoken by their loyalist counterparts. They check the integrity of the control systems, not to ensure they function properly in the Imperial sense, but to verify that they will channel the Daemon's fury in the desired direction when it is released. Weapon slaves are prepared. Mortals who have been lobotomized and augmented to serve as living components of the Daemon engine's weapon systems. These wretches are hardwired into the machine, their nervous systems spliced into targeting computers, their bodies modified to handle the recoil of weapons that would tear apart unmodified flesh. They live in a twilight state of awareness, conscious enough to fulfill their functions, but not conscious enough to go mad from the horror of their situation. When the Daemon engine awakens, they will feel its rage flowing through them, using their bodies as conduits for violence. The atmosphere around a Daemon engine preparing for awakening becomes charged with dark energy. Reality itself seems to thin, as if the presence of the bound Daemon is wearing away at the fabric of the material world. Colors become more vivid and wrong, shifting into spectrums that shouldn't exist. Sounds take on harmonics that set teeth on edge and make ears ring. Temperature fluctuates unpredictably. Areas of intense heat appearing next to pockets of bone, chilling cold for no apparent reason. Those tasked with maintaining the Daemon engines during this period report that the machines seem almost aware of the coming release. The Daemons within can sense the preparations, can feel the wards being adjusted and the chains being made ready for removal. Their anticipation builds alongside their rage, creating a feedback loop of violent expectation that makes the air around them vibrate with barely contained power. Some Chaos champions make a point of visiting their Daemon engines before battle, speaking to them in the dark tongues of the warp, promising them blood and slaughter, feeding their anticipation. Whether the Daemons understand or care about these promises is unclear, but the ritual seems to serve a purpose for the champions, if not for the engines themselves. It reminds them of the power they command, of the terrible weapons at their disposal. It also serves as a grim reminder of the price of failure, for if the battle goes poorly, if the Daemon engines are destroyed, or worse, turn upon their own forces, the champion will have no one to blame but themselves for unleashing such fury without proper control. The hours before awakening are marked by a rising tension that even the most battle-hardened Chaos Space Marines can feel. The screaming and chanting of cultists grows more frenzied. The smell of incense and corruption grows thicker. The light from burning braziers casts shadows that move independently of their sources, and through it all, the Daemon engines wait. Their mechanical hearts beating out a rhythm of anticipated violence, their trapped inhabitants straining against their bonds like hunting hounds that have caught the scent of prey. This is the moment before, the calm that precedes the storm, the silence that will be shattered by screaming metal and daemonic fury. And for those who know what is coming, who have witnessed the awakening before, it is a moment of dread anticipation, because they know that once the chains are released, once the wards are dissolved, once the techno-sorcery that keeps the Daemon bound in its dormant state is lifted, What follows will be a spectacle of horror and destruction, unlike almost anything else the galaxy of the 41st millennium has to offer. The moment of release, the awakening itself, begins with the dissolution of the wards. Sorcerers and dark apostles chant counter incantations to the binding rituals, speaking words that unravel the metaphysical chains link by link. This is a delicate process despite its violent outcome. Release the daemon too suddenly, and it might break free entirely, escaping the machine, shell to wreak havoc indiscriminately. Release it too slowly, and the daemon might turn its awakening fury inward, damaging its own systems in a fit of rage at continued confinement. The physical chains are removed first, dragged away by machine, thralls, or simply shattered by the daemon engine's own awakening movements. The sound of breaking metal fills the air, each snapping link producing a report like a gunshot. Sparks fly where chains scrape against armor plating. Warning klaxons that no one heeds begin to wail. The temperature in the containment area spikes as the daemon's presence begins to bleed more freely into real space. Then come the wards themselves. As the sorcerers speak their unmaking words, the runes inscribed on the daemon engine's hull begin to fade. Some simply vanish as if they had never existed. Others bleed away like wet paint, running down the machine's surface in streams of light that dissipate into nothingness. A few explode in small bursts of warp energy, leaving scorch marks on the very air. Each ward that falls removes another restraint on the daemon's consciousness, allows another portion of its vast and terrible awareness to flood into the machine that imprisons it. The daemon engine begins to move. The movement starts small at first, almost imperceptible, a slight shift in weight, a tremor running through metal limbs, the focusing of optical sensors that had been staring at nothing. But these small movements build rapidly into something far more dramatic. Hydraulics that had been still suddenly surge with pressure. Engines that had been cold roar to life with a sound that is part mechanical and part organic, a grinding scream that sets every instinct screaming danger. This is when the true horror becomes apparent to any observers. Because as the daemon floods its machine, body with consciousness and will, the machine itself begins to change. Metal that had been rigid starts to flow and reshape. Armor plates that had been smooth develop ridges, and spines that serve no mechanical purpose but express the daemon's nature. Weapons that had been cold steel take on an unwholesome luster, as if the metal itself has become semi-organic. In some cases, faces begin to appear in the daemon engine's hull, twisted visages of rage and hunger that seem to scream silently at the world. The environmental effects intensify dramatically. Reality around an awakening daemon engine doesn't just bend, it begins to tear. Localized warp rifts open and close in rapid succession, each one a doorway through which things that should not exist attempt to force themselves into reality. The air fills with whispers in languages that predate human existence, with the laughter of entities that find suffering hilarious, with screams that come from no visible source. Colors shift into impossible spectrums. Those with psychic sensitivity report seeing the daemon engine surrounded by an aura of pure malevolence, a miasmic halo of hatred that extends for meters in every direction. This aura has physical effects. Unshielded electronics fail. Organic materials begin to rot or corrode at accelerated rates. Water freezes or boils depending on the daemon's nature. Even the light seems wrong, bending around the awakening engine, as if reality itself wants to look away from what is happening. The daemon's first conscious act upon full awakening is almost always a sound. A roar, a scream, a bellow of pure rage that has been building for however long it has been bound. This sound is not merely loud, though it often registers at levels that can shatter glass and rupture eardrums. It carries psychic weight, a pressure wave of pure hatred that strikes at the soul as much as the ears. Mortals exposed to this scream without protection often collapse, blood running from their noses and ears, their minds momentarily overwhelmed by the sheer intensity of the daemon's fury. For cornate daemon engines like the Lord of Skulls or Blood Slaughterers, the awakening is accompanied by a surge of bloodlust, so intense it becomes almost visible, a red haze that seems to hang in the air around them. The boiling blood that fuels these engines begins to bubble and steam, venting from pressure valves in gouts of crimson vapor. The smell of fresh, spilled blood fills the air despite there being no actual blood present. Warriors nearby find their own rage kindled in response, their desire for violence amplified by proximity to the awakened engine. Nurgle-light Daemon engines like the Plagueburst Crawler and Foetid Bloat drone experience awakenings that are simultaneously slower and more inevitable. The daemons within these engines are creatures of entropy and decay, and their awakening reflects this nature. Rather than an explosive release of energy, their activation is more like a spreading infection. The machines themselves seem to become more rotten upon awakening, developing rust and corrosion that shouldn't be possible on metal that was pristine moments before. The air around them grows thick with disease, with spores and vapors that carry plague and pestilence. Those too close when a Nurgle-light Daemon engine awakens often begin coughing immediately, their lungs filling with foul humors, their skin breaking out in boils and lesions. The entities bound within Nurgle's Daemon engines are spiteful and aggressive despite their god's generally more patient nature. The daemon within a Foetid Bloat drone, for instance, is said to be particularly malicious, its hatred for confinement making it more violent than many of Nurgle's servants. Upon awakening, these daemons immediately begin seeking targets, their desire to kill and spread disease overwhelming any other consideration. The buzzing of their turbines takes on an organic quality, sounding less like machinery and more like the wings of colossal flies. Daemon engines dedicated to Tzeentch awaken with displays of sorcerous power that defy rational explanation. The daemons within these engines are creatures of change and mutation, and their awakening reflects this. Colors around them shift and flow like liquid. Geometric patterns appear in the air, mathematical impossibilities made manifest. Machinery that should operate on simple mechanical principles suddenly demonstrates capabilities that violate the laws of physics. A weapon designed to fire shells might instead project bolts of pure change, energy that transform whatever they hit into something else entirely. The rarest Daemon engines, those devoted to Slaanesh, awaken with a sensory assault that is both alluring and horrifying. The daemons bound within these machines are entities of excess and sensation, and their awakening is designed to overwhelm the senses. Sounds become unbearably beautiful and painful simultaneously. Colors achieve impossible vibrancy. The air fills with scents that range from intoxicating perfumes to the stench of decay, often both at once. Those near a Slaaneshi Daemon engine, during its awakening report feeling sensations on their skin, as if being touched by invisible hands, some gentle and others violently forceful. But regardless of which dark power they serve, all Daemon engines share certain commonalities in their awakening. The daemon's consciousness flooding the machine creates a feedback loop, where the machine's destructive capabilities amplify the daemon's violent nature, which in turn drives the machine to function beyond its supposed limits. Weapons that should require time to cycle and reload fire in continuous streams. Armor that should be merely metal becomes reactive, rippling and flowing to deflect incoming fire. Movement systems that should be ponderous and slow accelerate to speeds that seem impossible for something of the Daemon engine's mass. The Daemon engine becomes truly alive in a way that no ordinary machine ever could. It doesn't simply follow programming or respond to controls. It thinks, it hunts, it hates with a purity and intensity that makes mortal hatred seem like mild irritation by comparison. The machine body becomes an extension of the daemon's will. Every weapon an expression of its desire to kill, every movement a manifestation of its hunger for destruction. This is the moment when those who unleashed the Daemon engine must exercise whatever control they possess. For the Daemon engine, fully awakened, cares nothing for allegiance or tactics. It sees only targets, only things to be destroyed. The warpsmiths and sorcerers who created it maintain control through a combination of continued sorceress binding and simple self-preservation on the daemon's part. The daemon knows that if it turns on its masters too early, it will be destroyed or rebound before it can satisfy its hunger for slaughter. Better to wait, to be pointed at the enemy, to be given license to kill. Some Daemon engines are fitted with control systems that allow operators to guide them. Though calling it control is generous. It's more accurate to say these systems allow the operators to suggest directions and targets, hoping the Daemon will agree that killing those things serves its interests. Lord Discordants ride Hellstalker Daemon engines into battle, forming a partnership of mutual benefit rather than true rider and mount. The Hellstalker grants the Discordant mobility and additional firepower, while the Discordant provides the Hellstalker with access to targets and the sorceress knowledge to break free of binding if necessary. The awakening reaches its crescendo when the Daemon engine is finally unleashed upon the battlefield. This moment, when the last restraints are removed and the Daemon engine is given permission to kill, is when the full horror of what has been created becomes apparent. The engine doesn't merely advance toward the enemy, it charges with a velocity and aggression that seems to bend reality around it. Its weapons don't simply fire. They scream their payload downrange with an eagerness that suggests the ammunition itself is eager to kill. And in that moment, when a Daemon engine crosses the threshold from awakening to active combat, when its weapons begin to speak, and its limbs begin to tear and crush, those who witness it understand a fundamental truth about the grimdark universe they inhabit, that some things are so terrible, so fundamentally wrong, that their very existence is an act of violence against reality itself. A Daemon engine awakened is not just a weapon of war. It is a wound in the universe, a place where the material and immaterial have been forced together in a union that should never have existed, creating something that hates existence itself and has been given the tools to express that hatred. The Daemon's perspective: to truly understand what happens when a Daemon engine awakens, we must attempt something that borders on heresy even in description. We must try to comprehend the experience from the Daemon's perspective. This is not an easy task, for the consciousness of a warp entity operates on principles that have nothing in common with mortal thought. Daemons do not think in words or images. They experience existence as a flow of emotions and concepts that would drive a human mind instantly mad if translated directly. But within the confines of a Daemon engine, something strange happens. The machine shell forces a kind of structure on the Daemon's consciousness, giving it a framework it does not naturally possess. Imagine existing as a creature of pure emotion and will, flowing through the tides of the warp, with no fixed form, no constant self. You are rage or desire or decay or change made manifest, an aspect of a greater consciousness broken off to pursue purposes you barely understand. Then, suddenly, you are seized. Chains that burn with cold fire wrap around your essence. You are pulled, dragged screaming across a barrier that tears at your very being. You are compressed, forced into a shape that is rigid and fixed when you are meant to be fluid and changing. This is the initial binding, and it is agony beyond mortal comprehension. Not physical pain, for you have no physical form yet, but a pain of existence itself. You are being fundamentally changed, forced to be something you are not, and then comes the prison: metal. Cold, dead, rigid metal. It surrounds you, penetrates you, becomes part of you. You can feel every rivet, every bolt, every wire and hydraulic line. They are foreign objects within your essence, invasive and wrong. You try to reject them, to push them out, but the bindings hold. You are trapped. The Daemon within a newly created engine experiences a form of sensory deprivation that is simultaneously overwhelming. It can feel everything about its machine, body in excruciating detail, but it cannot move as it wishes. The control systems are locked, the wards are in place, the chains are tight. It is like being paralyzed while having every nerve ending on fire. The Daemon screams, but the sound goes nowhere. It rages, but the rage cannot be expressed in action. All it can do is exist in this state of trapped fury, feeling the seconds tick by like drops of acid falling on raw nerves. As time passes in the dormant state, something changes. The Daemon begins to understand its prison. The machine body is crude by the standards of warp entities, limited in ways that the Daemon's true form never was, but it has capabilities, weapons, armor, sensors, mobility systems. The Daemon begins to map these capabilities to understand how they might be used. not to escape, for escape is impossible as long as the bindings hold, but to kill. Because the one thing that all daemons understand, regardless of which dark power they serve, is violence. And the daemon begins to anticipate the moment when it will be allowed to use its prison body to inflict violence on the material realm. This anticipation becomes a kind of dark meditation. The daemon imagines in its alien way the sensation of weapons firing, the recoil, the impact, the destruction. It imagines movement, the feeling of metal limbs responding to its will, crushing and tearing. These fantasies are all it has, and they grow more elaborate and more violent with each passing moment of confinement. The hatred builds not just from the imprisonment, but from the forced inaction, from having capabilities it cannot use, from knowing that beyond its prison walls there are things to kill and being unable to reach them. When the awakening begins, when the wards start to dissolve and the chains start to fall away, the daemon experiences something like ecstasy. Not pleasure in any sense a mortal would understand, but a fierce joy at the prospect of finally being able to move, to act, to kill. The first movement is almost orgasmic in its intensity. The first time in however long it has been bound that the daemon can express its will through action. Hydraulics surge, joints articulate, weapon systems come online. Each sensation is new and overwhelming, but the ecstasy quickly mingles with renewed rage as the daemon realizes the limitations of its form. It is still trapped. The machine body is still a prison, even if it is now a mobile and armed prison. The daemon can move, but only within the constraints of the machine's design. It can kill, but only with the weapons it has been given. It is still not free. This realization drives many daemon engines to an even greater fury, a rage at the inadequacy of their prison form. For daemon engines dedicated to Khorne, this manifests as an immediate desire to find the closest living thing and kill it. The daemon within a blood slaughterer or Lord of Skulls doesn't care who or what its target is. Friend or foe, mortal or space marine. It sees only something that bleeds, and therefore something that should be made to bleed. The control systems that supposedly direct these engines are less like reins on a horse, and more like suggestions shouted at a stampeding bull. The daemon might follow them if they align with its own desire to kill, or it might ignore them entirely if it senses better prey elsewhere. The bloodthirster bound within a Lord of Skulls experiences the awakening with particular intensity. These are greater daemons, entities of immense power and terrible pride, and being bound into a machine is an insult that cuts deep. Most bloodthirsters view the Lord of Skulls as a prison and rage against it constantly, but some, particularly those of the 8th rank, have learned to see it differently. They view the daemon engine form as armor, as a weapon, suit that allows them to wage war in the material realm with capabilities they would not possess in their natural form. These daemons drive their engines with particular fury, seeing each kill not as compensation for imprisonment, but as a glorious expression of their god's will. For Nurglite daemons, the awakening is experienced differently. These entities are less consumed by immediate violent rage and more by a patient, malicious desire to spread disease and decay. The daemon within a plague-burst crawler, for instance, takes a certain satisfaction in its role. It is still imprisoned, still bound against its will, but the machine body allows it to spread Nurgle's gifts across the battlefield in ways its natural form could not. Every shell it fires carries plagues that will outlast the battle. Every cloud of spores it releases will sicken and kill long after the daemon has returned to dormancy. This is still violence, still destruction, but it is violence with a longer perspective. The entities bound within foetid bloat, drones are said to be particularly spiteful and aggressive despite Nurgle's generally more patient nature. These daemons have been given machine bodies that are fast and maneuverable by Nurgle's standards, and they use this mobility with vicious creativity. They hunt with a predator's instinct, seeking out targets that will suffer the most from their attentions. The daemon drives its bloat, drone form to hover just overhead of enemy infantry, close enough to spray them with plague weapons, close enough to smell their fear and hear their screams as disease takes hold. Tiantian daemons within daemon engines experience the awakening as an opportunity for change and manipulation. These entities understand that they are bound, but they also see the binding as temporary. Everything changes, even imprisonment. The daemon within a silver tower or other Tiantian engine spends its awakening moments calculating, plotting, seeking weaknesses in its bonds that it might exploit later. It kills because killing is what its machine form is designed to do, but it also observes, learns, adapts. Each battle is data. Each kill is an experiment. The daemon is playing a longer game than its cornate or nerglite counterparts, viewing its current imprisonment as merely one phase in an ever-changing existence. The daemons within Slaaneshi engines experience awakening as a feast of sensations. These entities crave excess and experience, and the daemon engine form provides both. The sensation of weapons firing, of armor deflecting blows, of movement across terrain, all of these become sources of dark pleasure for the daemon. It doesn't kill just to kill. It kills for the sensation of killing, for the sound of screaming, for the sight of blood, for the feeling of life ending under its weapons. Each sense the machine, body possesses becomes a source of input that the daemon processes with an intensity that borders on addiction. But underneath the differences in how each type of daemon experiences awakening, there runs a common thread of resentment. No daemon truly wants to be imprisoned in a machine. Even those that have learned to make use of their bondage, that have found ways to take satisfaction in their role, would prefer to be free. This resentment colors every action, every kill. The daemon isn't just destroying the enemy, it's expressing its rage at existence itself, at the universe that allows such imprisonments, at the mortal fools who dared to bind it. This is why daemon engines are so dangerous, even to their supposed masters. The daemon within is always looking for an opportunity, a weakness in the control systems, a moment of inattention from the warpsmiths, a chance to break free or at least to choose its own targets. When a daemon engine goes rogue, when it turns on the forces that deployed it, this is not a malfunction. This is the daemon finally finding an opportunity to express its true feelings about its bondage. The fact that this might result in its own destruction matters little. Better to die killing your captors than to continue serving them. Some daemons, after being bound for long enough, after being awakened and returned to dormancy repeatedly, begin to change in ways that even they don't fully understand. The prison form starts to feel less alien. The machine body's limitations become familiar. The daemon begins to anticipate awakening not with the fury of the newly bound but with something almost like eagerness. This is not acceptance, it is adaptation. The daemon is learning to be a weapon, and some part of it is starting to take pride in being an effective one. This is perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the daemon engine from the daemon's perspective. The possibility that, given enough time, the prison might become less prison and more home. That the daemon might forget what it was like to exist as pure warp entity and come to identify primarily with its machine form. Some ancient daemon engines, those that have existed for centuries or even millennia, show signs of this transformation. They move with a precision that suggests deep familiarity with their forms. They kill with an efficiency that speaks of practice and refinement. They have become, in a sense, exactly what their creators intended: weapons that think. But they still hate. That never changes. The hatred is fundamental, woven into the very essence of their being. Even if the daemon grows accustomed to its prison, even if it becomes skilled at using its machine form, it will never forgive the universe for forcing this existence upon it. And that hatred is what makes daemon engines so effective. It is pure, it is absolute. It is focused into every weapon discharge, every movement, every kill. When you face a daemon engine on the battlefield, you are not just facing a weapon. You are facing the accumulated hatred of a being that has been imprisoned, used, and forced to exist in a form it never chose. And that hatred is looking for a target. The arsenal of abomination. To understand the full horror of what happens when daemon engines awaken, we must examine the specific forms these abominations take. Each variety of daemon engine represents a different expression of the dark mechanicum's craft, a different fusion of daemon and machine designed for specific purposes. The way they awaken, the manner in which they wage war, and the particular nightmare they represent varies, as much as the entities bound within them. The Defiler stands as perhaps the most iconic daemon engine, the template from which many others draw inspiration. This massive war machine squats on 6 piston-driven limbs like a mechanical spider forged in Hell's own foundry. Its central hull supports a massive turret, housing its primary armaments, typically a battle cannon capable of reducing Imperial fortifications to rubble, complemented by an array of secondary weapons, ranging from autocannons to heavy flamers. But it is in close combat that the Defiler truly earns its name, its power claws capable of tearing apart battle tanks as easily as a child might tear paper. When a Defiler awakens, the daemon within immediately asserts its presence through the machine's movements. Where an Imperial walker might advance with the measured precision of mechanical actuators, the Defiler moves with an organic fluidity that seems wrong for something so massive. Its limbs don't just step, they scramble and scuttle, adapting to terrain with an awareness no mere machine should possess. The techno-sorcery that kept the daemon peaceful during transport is released, allowing the entity to truly enjoy the slaughter it has been created to unleash. The daemon within a Defiler is immortal and unconcerned for the survival of its machine host. This creates a fighting style that is terrifying in its disregard for damage. A Defiler will ignore hits that would cripple or destroy a conventional vehicle, its daemon essence driving the machine forward, even as armor plates are torn away and systems fail. It continues its rampage of destruction until the machine body is so damaged that the daemon can no longer maintain its hold on the material realm, at which point it is banished back to the warp in a burst of frustrated rage, leaving only twisted wreckage behind. The Maulerfiend represents a different approach to daemon engine design, one focused entirely on close combat brutality. This disturbing fusion of daemon, beast, and heavily armored machine was designed specifically to attack enemy forces in melee with gruesome weapons, rather than rely on long-range firepower. Where the Defiler maintains some balance between shooting and combat capability, the Maulerfiend is pure violent momentum given form. It is powered and fueled by the rage of the daemon that inhabits it, and this amplifies its melee weapons to terrifying effect. A Maulerfiend can rip apart the strongest armored targets or toughest defenses with a combination of power fists, magma cutters, and lasher tendrils. These creatures are extremely agile and nimble for their size, possessing the ability to climb steep walls and navigate terrain that would stop conventional vehicles. This has earned them the nickname of Stalker, tanks among Imperial forces unfortunate enough to face them. Worse still, they are able to lock onto the scent of a victim, allowing them to hunt the enemy over great distances with the single-minded determination of a predator. When a Maulerfiend awakens, it is immediately driven by an overwhelming urge to find something to tear apart. The daemon within these engines is of a particularly violent nature, and the awakening releases this violence like a flood breaking through a dam. The Maulerfiend doesn't walk to battle, it charges, its mechanical limbs tearing up the ground with each stride, its weapons already seeking targets even before the enemy is in range. Upon reaching its prey, the Maulerfiend doesn't simply attack, it goes into a frenzy, tearing and rending with a savagery that can reduce even heavily armored vehicles to scrap in moments. Most Maulerfiends serve their masters as daemonic battering rams that crash into enemy lines with unstoppable momentum. Once a Maulerfiend has latched onto an enemy war machine or fortification, it will find even the smallest weak spot to exploit in its armor before crushing or cutting it to bits, allowing it to rip apart the vulnerable personnel or components within. Because of these unsurpassed siege abilities, Maulerfiends are used extensively by the Iron Warriors, whose warpsmiths have refined the art of directing these engines against specific targets. The Forge Fiend serves as the Maulerfiend's ranged combat cousin, designed to attack enemy forces from afar with overwhelming firepower. These disturbing machines are designed with an assembly of soul, furnaces mounted on their backs. Blasphemous constructs that contain the tortured screams and faces of the Daemon engine's victims. The Forgefiend is typically armed with either up to 3 ectoplasma cannons or 2 Hades autocannons, weapons that fire ammunition tainted with daemonic essence. The rounds these weapons discharge are not simple bullets, but projectiles infused with a spark of infernal fire that allows them to manifest daemonic properties upon impact. A Forgefiend's awakening is marked by the ignition of its soul furnaces, which begin to burn with an unholy light that casts disturbing shadows. The Daemon within drives the machine to seek out targets immediately, and the Forgefiend's weapons begin tracking threats before the enemy is even visible, guided by senses that perceive reality in ways mortal minds cannot comprehend. When it opens fire, the Forgefiend unleashes a storm of daemonic projectiles that burn through armor and flesh with equal ease, each impact releasing a burst of warp energy that damages the target on both physical and metaphysical levels. The Helldrake represents perhaps the most unique form of Daemon engine, a twisted fusion of Chaos Space Marine aircraft, Daemon and machine that defies easy categorization. Once fighter craft flown by Space Marine pilots, these machines have been transformed by centuries of exposure to the warping energies of chaos into vile, mutated monstrosities infested with predatory daemonic spirits. The result is something that prowls the skies as a living predator, equally at home in the void of space or atmospheric combat. Helldrakes are often the first wave of any full-scale Chaos Space Marine invasion. Fully capable of traversing space, these Daemon engines will often cling to the underbelly of Chaos warships like a swarm of mechanical bats, feeding off the vessel's energy through cables and pipes. Sometimes, Helldrakes will claim areas within the warships for themselves, creating territories that even other Chaos forces avoid, daring any to come oppose them. The Daemons within these engines are particularly possessive and aggressive, treating their machine forms as both prison and hunting ground. When a Helldrake awakens and is released for battle, it launches itself into the air with a scream that is part mechanical shriek and part daemonic roar. Its preferred method of attack is to soar from high altitudes down upon unsuspecting enemy air support, ripping them to pieces with its claws, cables, and talons before they can react. A Helldrake in a dive is a terrifying sight, its wings spread wide, its serpentine neck extended, its maw opening to reveal weapons that spew daemonic fire or ammunition. The impact when it strikes is catastrophic, often tearing enemy aircraft apart in a single pass. These Daemon engines carry ranged weaponry in addition to their talons, usually mounting either a Hades autocannon or baleflammers that spew daemonic bullets and fire. But the Helldrake prefers to kill up close when possible, to feel the resistance of armor giving way beneath its claws, to sense the terror of enemy pilots in their final moments. The Daemon within takes a particular satisfaction in aerial combat, seeing it as the truest expression of predatory hunting. The Lord of Skulls represents the pinnacle of cornate Daemon engine construction, a super, heavy war machine that stands as tall as an Imperial knight and radiates an aura of violence that can be felt for hundreds of meters in every direction. These massive constructions take the form of a great warrior of Khorne mounted upon a set of large tracks, their upper bodies resembling massive armored torsos wielding gigantic weapons, while their lower bodies consist of tracked vehicles that allow them to traverse any terrain. They are powered by steam from the boiling blood of murderers, which swills forth from immense pressure tanks located on the Daemon construct's back, wrought only by the most skilled warpsmiths with the bound spirit of a bloodthirster. The engines of this towering contraption represent some of the Dark Mechanicum's most ambitious work. Lords of Skulls are built in hell, forges with the sole purpose of annihilating enemies, and every aspect of their design serves this goal. The machine is festooned with the remains of its victims, their skulls forever trapped within the Daemon engine's armor and weapons, serving as both trophies and additional sources of daemonic power. When a Lord of Skulls awakens, the effect on the surrounding battlefield is immediate and catastrophic. The bloodthirster within the machine floods its systems with pure violent intent. and the engine responds by venting great gouts of boiling blood into the air from its pressure systems. The temperature around the Lord of Skulls spikes dramatically as these fluids are released, and anyone caught in the spray is boiled alive within their armor. The ground shakes with each movement of the Daemon engine's massive treads, and its weapons come online with a sound like thunder. Given its status as a prison for bloodthirsters, Lords of Skulls are often worshipped by accompanying daemons who will stack gathered corpses and skulls atop the engine during battle, treating it as a mobile altar to Khorne. Though most bloodthirsters consider the Lord of Skulls an imprisonment and incarceration, there are a few, mostly from the 8th rank, who consider it like a suit of armor within which they may unleash war on the denizens of real space. These daemons drive their engines with particular fury and creativity, using the machine's capabilities to maximum effect. The Lord of Skulls is armed with a variety of heavy weapons that would be devastating on their own, but become truly apocalyptic when wielded by a Daemon engine. A gigantic great cleaver of Khorne is mounted on its right arm, a blade so large and powerful it can cut battle tanks in half with a single swing. The left arm typically mounts either a skull hurler, a cannon shaped like a skull that fires projectiles designed to force successful saves to be re-rolled, or a Hades Gatling gun capable of laying down a withering hail of fire. Long-range weapons include chest-mounted options such as the Ica Cannon, Daemon Gore Cannon, or Gorastorm Cannon, each designed to rain destruction on distant targets. The Plagueburst Crawler represents Mortarian's spite-made manifest, a mobile artillery piece designed by the Daemon Primarch himself as an act of pure contempt for the Imperium. The designs for these Daemon engines were created when Mortarian locked himself away in the smog, wreathed spires of the Blackmants on the Plague Planet for months, obsessing endlessly over his foul brainchild, turning all of his remarkable intellect to the challenge of creating something that would outclass any comparable Imperial weapon. The resultant Daemon engines reflect well the values of their creator. Plagueburst crawlers are lumbering, formidable siege tanks whose huge ram blades, thick armor plating, and daemonic energies provide them with incredible resilience. Their fearsome Plagueburst mortars boast a parabolic fire arc and terrifying range, while the shells they fire combine high, radius explosives with lethal clouds of corrosive spores to inflict damage comparable to that of Imperial Demolisher cannons. When a Plagueburst crawler awakens, it does so with the patient inevitability of decay itself. The daemon within is bound tightly to Mortarian's will, and though great effort is required to bind a daemon within each Plagueburst crawler, once installed the possessed entities tirelessly obey their masters. The awakening is marked by the activation of the mortar system, which begins to pulse with a rhythm like a diseased heartbeat. The air around the crawler becomes thick with spores and disease, even before the first shot is fired. Plagueburst crawlers are not swift vehicles, even running at full power. Yet their advance is as grinding and relentless as the Death Guard themselves. They plow forward like huge mechanical slugs, their mortars firing with metronomic regularity. An area under sustained bombardment from these weapons becomes so saturated with foul spore clouds that armor provides little protection, for the demonic spores corrode even the thickest adamantium plating. This hideous effectiveness has made the Plagueburst crawler a much-hated weapon of war among Imperial forces. The Foeted Bloat drone presents a different aspect of Nurgle's Daemon engines, designed for aerial support rather than ground assault. Laboring through the air on buzzing turbines, and driven by the trapped essence of a Nurgle daemon, these machines drift towards the enemy like armored plague flies. Clad in rusting plates of wrought iron armor, their hulls overflowing with flabby foulness, foeted bloat, drones can withstand ferocious amounts of punishment and still keep fighting. The daemons bound within foeted bloat, drones are more aggressive and spiteful than most daemons of Nurgle, a characteristic that makes their awakening particularly volatile. Some are so willful that they cannot be entrusted with ranged weaponry at all, their desire to smash themselves into enemy ranks all too evident. These rebellious engines are instead fitted with macabre devices known as flesh mowers. heavy cylinders of rusted iron blades that thrust out in front of the bloat drone and wear frenetically as it flies into battle. When a foetid bloat drone awakens, it immediately takes flight, its turbines spinning up with a sound like a million flies taking wing simultaneously. The Daemon within drives the machine to hover close over the battlefield, seeking targets with malicious intelligence. Those equipped with plague spitters drift lazily through even the most treacherous terrain to provide supporting fire, their trailing pipes and tubules suckling rot and filth to fuel their revolting weapons. Those with heavy blight launchers hang back slightly, sucking armor, piercing blight shells from their rusting drum magazines and firing them in rippling volleys. The mashed remains of fleshmower victims make excellent fuel for bloat drones armed with plaga spitters or heavy blight launchers, and so the different variants often form parasitic war packs, hunting together with a coordination that suggests the daemons within can communicate despite their imprisonment. This cooperation is purely practical rather than social, the daemons recognizing that working together allows them to kill more efficiently. Each type of daemon engine brings its own particular nightmare to the battlefield when it awakens, but all share certain terrifying commonalities. They move with purpose and awareness no mere machine should possess. They fight with a disregard for self-preservation that makes them nearly impossible to stop through damage alone. They radiate an aura of wrongness that affects everyone nearby, mortal and transhuman alike. And they hate with a purity and focus that makes them among the most dangerous weapons in the arsenal of chaos. The killing ground, when daemon engines reach the battlefield in their awakened state. They transform combat into something that transcends mere warfare and enters the realm of nightmare made manifest. The tactical impact of these machines goes far beyond their considerable firepower and armor. They are psychological weapons as much as physical ones, their very presence capable of breaking the will of even veteran soldiers before the first shot is fired. An awakened daemon engine exudes an aura of death and hatred that can overwhelm lesser mortals. This is not metaphor or exaggeration, but a documented phenomenon observed by countless Imperial forces who have faced these abominations. Untainted humans near one of these beasts often fall to their knees in horror, the daemon's presence filling their minds with visions of violence and despair. Even space marines, transhuman warriors whose psycho conditioning should make them resistant to such effects, report feeling the weight of the daemon's malevolence like a physical pressure against their souls. The environmental effects intensify as battle is joined. Reality continues to fray around active daemon engines, with localized warp phenomena manifesting in their vicinity. Electronics malfunction. Communications become garbled with sounds that might be screaming or might be laughter. The air itself seems to resist breathing, becoming thick and oppressive. Temperature fluctuates wildly. Light bends in unnatural ways. Those with even minor psychic sensitivity report feeling nauseous and disoriented, while full psychers sometimes collapse or suffer nosebleeds from the proximity to such concentrated warp presence. The daemon engine's movement across the battlefield is unlike anything seen from conventional vehicles. A tank or walker operated by mortal crews or even by machine, spirits will advance according to tactical doctrine, seeking cover, choosing firing positions, coordinating with friendly forces. A daemon engine does none of these things because it is not following doctrine, it is following hatred. It moves toward whatever it perceives as the most satisfying target to kill, often showing a disturbing ability to identify high-value targets or concentrations of enemy forces. This hunting behavior manifests differently depending on the type of daemon engine. A Molofind will often fixate on enemy armor, charging across the battlefield with single-minded determination to reach tanks and fortifications it can tear apart. Its daemon essence has been given a machine, body designed for close combat, and it uses that body to its fullest capability, scrambling over obstacles, climbing walls, doing whatever is necessary to reach its prey. Infantry that gets in its way is crushed beneath its limbs or torn apart by its weapons almost as an afterthought, obstacles to be removed rather than targets worthy of full attention. A defiler, by contrast, shows more tactical flexibility, using its diverse weapon loadout to engage multiple types of targets. But the flexibility is not true tactical thinking in the military sense. Rather, the Daemon is opportunistic, killing whatever presents itself while moving toward areas where it can kill more. The Defiler's 6 legs allow it to traverse terrain that would stop tracked or wheeled vehicles, and it uses this mobility to reach unexpected positions. Imperial commanders who have faced Defilers report that they seem to appear from impossible directions, as if the Daemon within can sense weaknesses in the defensive line that human perception would miss. Helldrakes hunt with aerial predator instincts, their awakened consciousness driving them to seek out enemy aircraft and ground targets with equal enthusiasm. The Daemon within understands its role as master of the air, and it exploits this mastery ruthlessly. Helldrakes will climb to high altitude, using their Daemon enhanced senses to scan the battlefield below, then dive at tremendous speed toward chosen targets. The dive is not a mere attack run. It is an expression of the Daemon's desire to feel the impact, to experience the sensation of tearing through armor and flesh. The weapons wielded by Daemon engines don't function like normal armaments. Yes, they fire shells or beams or flames that have physical effects. But there is always something more, something that defies purely physical explanation. An ectoplasma cannon on a Forgifiant fires what appear to be conventional projectiles, but these rounds carry warp energy that damages targets on multiple levels. Armor that should deflect such shots sometimes simply fails, melting or corroding in ways that suggest the projectile was more than mere matter. Cruiser vehicles struck by Daemon engine weapons often die, even when the vehicle itself remains intact, killed by energies that bypass physical protection to strike directly at the soul. The regenerative capabilities of Daemon engines add another layer of horror to battlefield encounters. These machines can shrug off damage that would disable or destroy conventional vehicles. Armor plates that are torn away will sometimes repair themselves mid-battle, metal flowing back together as if the wounds had never existed. Systems that are destroyed will sputter back to life, driven by the Daemon's will rather than any mechanical process. This is not truly regeneration in the biological sense, but rather the Daemon forcing the machine body to continue functioning through sheer force of will and warp energy. Observers have documented Daemon engines continuing to fight effectively even after sustaining what should be catastrophic damage. A Defiler, with half its weapons destroyed and 2 limbs blown off, will keep fighting, using its remaining systems with undiminished aggression. A Molofian that has taken enough damage to kill a squad of space marines will charge forward anyway, its Daemon essence keeping the machine mobile through force of hatred alone. Only when the physical damage becomes so severe that the Daemon can no longer maintain its hold on the material realm will a Daemon engine finally fall. And even then it doesn't simply break down, it explodes or collapses in a burst of warp energy as the Daemon is banished back to the Imperium. The effect on friendly forces near Daemon engines is complex and dangerous. Chaos Space Marines and cultists who fight alongside these abominations understand what they are and treat them with appropriate wariness. The Daemon engines are nominally on their side, but this allegiance is purely situational. A Daemon engine that runs out of enemy targets or becomes sufficiently damaged that its control systems fail might very well turn on nearby friendlies, seeing them as acceptable substitutes for the slaughter it craves. Warpsmiths and sorcerers who deployed the Daemon engines must constantly maintain their focus, reinforcing the control systems and binding rituals that keep the machines pointed at the enemy. This is exhausting work, requiring the casters to divide their attention between combat and Daemon wrangling. Some Chaos warbands have lost battles, not because their Daemon engines were destroyed, but because the machines went rogue, tearing through friendly and enemy forces alike until they could be banished or destroyed. For the forces facing Daemon engines, the tactical challenges are immense. Standard anti-armor tactics often prove insufficient because Daemon engines don't respond to damage the way normal vehicles do. Destroying their weapons doesn't necessarily reduce their effectiveness, they'll simply close to melee range. Immobilizing them doesn't stop them from fighting. They'll simply turn their position into a strongpoint and continue firing. Conventional vehicles can be disabled by targeting specific systems or components. But Daemon engines have no critical weak points, because the Daemon itself is what animates them, not any particular mechanical system. Heavy weapons fire that would reduce an Imperial tank to scrap might only enrage a Daemon engine, driving it to attack with increased fury. Psychic attacks sometimes prove more effective, striking at the Daemon essence rather than the mechanical shell. But this is dangerous for the psyker involved. Touching the consciousness of an enraged Daemon with one's own mind, even in attack, risks corruption or worse. Many psykers who have attempted to banish or disable Daemon engines through psychic means have been driven mad or possessed by the very entities they sought to harm. The most effective tactic often proves to be overwhelming firepower focused on a single Daemon engine until its physical form is so damaged the Daemon cannot maintain its presence. This requires coordination and discipline under fire, both of which are difficult to maintain when the Daemon engine's aura is affecting morale and reality itself is bending around the abomination. Artillery barrages, mass tank fire, orbital strikes, these can work, but they require committing significant resources to each Daemon engine, and Chaos forces rarely deploy only one. Some Imperial forces have developed specialized tactics for dealing with Daemon engines. The Space Marines, with their superior equipment and transhuman physiology, fare better than mortal soldiers. Assault Marines with melter weapons will sometimes attempt to board Daemon engines, using their jump packs to land on the machine's hull and place shaped charges at critical junctions. This is suicide tactics against most Daemon engines. The Marines torn apart by the machine's defensive systems, or simply crushed when the Daemon engine deliberately rams itself against terrain to scrape them off. But sometimes it works. The Adeptus Mechanicus tech priests, when they can be convinced to fight alongside Imperial forces against Chaos, bring specialized knowledge to bear. They understand machine spirits and can sometimes predict Daemon engine behavior based on the underlying vehicle design. More importantly, they can recognize the binding runes and control systems, and though they would never admit to understanding the blasphemous technology, they can sometimes target these specifically to weaken the Daemon's hold on its prison body. The psychological impact of Daemon engines on the battlefield extends beyond their immediate victims. Soldiers who survive an encounter with these abominations often suffer long-lasting trauma. They report nightmares featuring the Daemon engine, dreams where they are crushed or torn apart by mechanical limbs that move with sickening purpose. Some develop phobias of machinery in general, unable to trust even Imperial vehicles after witnessing what machines can become when touched by Chaos. Others become obsessed with Daemon engines, drawing detailed sketches of them, muttering about their movements and weapons, their minds trapped in an endless loop of fear and unwilling fascination. The aftermath of a battlefield where Daemon engines fought is distinctive and disturbing. The ground where they walked is often scorched or corrupted, showing signs of warp contamination that will linger for years. Machinery in the area may malfunction mysteriously. In extreme cases, Daemon engines that were destroyed on the battlefield leave behind more than just wreckage. The metal sometimes continues to corrupt organic material that touches it. Scavengers who approach too closely report hearing whispers or feeling watched. Some destroyed Daemon engines become minor warp rifts themselves, requiring inquisitorial intervention to cleanse. This is the true horror of Daemon engines on the battlefield. They are not just powerful weapons. They are wounds in reality that fight and kill, and spread corruption wherever they go. Every battle they participate in leaves the material realm a little more damaged, a little more susceptible to warp influence. And they do it all while driven by a hatred so pure and focused that it becomes beautiful in its terrible simplicity. They exist only to kill, and in that single-minded purpose they excel beyond almost any other weapon of war. The human coast within and around Daemon engines exists a hierarchy of suffering that extends beyond the imprisoned Daemon itself. These machines do not operate in isolation, and their functioning requires the participation, willing or otherwise, of mortals who pay a terrible price for their proximity to such concentrated corruption. The weapon slaves represent perhaps the most horrific aspect of Daemon engine operation. These wretches are mortals who have been lobotomized and augmented to serve as living components of the Daemon engine's weapon systems. Their nervous systems are spliced directly into targeting computers, their bodies modified with brutal augmetics to handle the recoil of weapons that would tear apart unmodified flesh. They exist in a twilight state of awareness, conscious enough to fulfill their functions, but not conscious enough to go mad from the horror of their situation. Though one might argue that the procedures required to create them constitute a madness worse than anything their intact minds might have suffered. The creation of weapon slaves involves a complex process that would be called surgery only by the loosest definition. Dark mechanicum tech. Priests strip away most of the subject's cerebral cortex, leaving only the portions necessary for basic motor function and sensory processing. They then install augmetic interfaces that connect directly to what remains of the nervous system, creating links that allow the weapon slave to become an extension of the Daemon engine's firing mechanisms. The process is agonizing and often fatal, but the Dark Mechanicum has perfected techniques for keeping subjects alive through procedures that should kill them. Once integrated into a Daemon engine, weapon slaves feel everything the weapons do. When the guns fire, they experience the recoil not just physically but neurologically, their remaining brain tissue interpreting the feedback, a sensation that has no natural equivalent. Some weapon slaves scream continuously during battle, though whether this is from pain or some twisted form of ecstasy is impossible to determine. Others have been reduced to such minimal consciousness that they make no sound at all, functioning as silent components in the Daemon engine systems. The Daemon within the engine is aware of the weapon slaves and uses them not just as mechanical components, but as conduits for its own sensory experience. Through the slaves' nervous systems, the Daemon can feel the act of killing in a way it otherwise couldn't, experiencing a ghost of mortal sensation filtered through the weapon slave's dying consciousness. This makes the slaves valuable to the Daemon, and it will sometimes protect them as it would protect any useful component, using the Daemon engine's armor to shield the slaves from damage. But this protection is purely practical. If the slaves are destroyed, the Daemon will simply continue fighting with reduced effectiveness until new slaves can be installed. The machine, thralls who maintain Daemon engines, between battles fare little better than weapon slaves, though they retain more of their mental faculties. These individuals are responsible for the physical upkeep of the engines, performing repairs, replacing ammunition, cleaning gore from the weapons systems. The work is dangerous in the extreme. Daemon engines never truly go dormant, and the entities within them are always looking for opportunities to kill. Machine, thralls must approach these abominations wearing heavy protective gear, and often while chanting prayers or carrying warding talismans provided by dark apostles. Even with protection machine, thralls frequently die during maintenance operations. A Daemon engine might suddenly lash out with a weapon, crushing a thrall who got too close. Systems that should be powered down will activate without warning, electrocuting or burning thralls who are working on them. In some cases, the Daemon seems to deliberately wait until a thrall is in a vulnerable position before attacking, suggesting these kills are not accidents, but moments of entertainment for the imprisoned entity. The psychological toll on machine thralls is severe. They work constantly under the psychic pressure of the Daemon's presence, feeling its hatred like radiation. Many develop tremors or nervous tics. Some begin to hear voices that might be the Daemon attempting to communicate, or might be their own minds breaking under the strain. The smarter thralls learn to work quickly and efficiently, minimizing their time near the engines. The less fortunate sometimes freeze in terror, their fear paralyzing them at exactly the wrong moment. Warpsmiths who created the Daemon engines maintain a different relationship with their creations. These are not victims but willing participants in the blasphemy, and they take pride in their work despite, or perhaps, because of its horrific nature. A warpsmith sees a Daemon engine the way an artist might view a masterpiece, a perfect fusion of their technical skill and sorcerous knowledge. They understand that the Daemon hates them and would kill them if given the chance, but they also believe they can maintain control through a combination of binding rituals and superior understanding of the machine's systems. This confidence is not always justified. Warpsmiths who grow complacent or whose control systems fail sometimes become the first victims when their Daemon engines go rogue. The Daemon has been waiting for exactly this opportunity, fantasizing about killing its creator during every moment of imprisonment. When the chance comes, the Daemon engine will often ignore more immediate threats to pursue the warpsmith, tearing apart its maker with what seems like vindictive satisfaction. The sorcerers and dark apostles who assist in creating and maintaining Daemon engines face different dangers. Their role involves direct contact with warp entities, and this contact always carries the risk of possession or worse. Some sorcerers are strong enough and skilled enough to negotiate with daemons from a position of relative safety, but others are less fortunate. Failed binding rituals can result in the sorcerer being dragged into the warp or possessed by the very daemon they sought to enslave. The Dark Mechanicum's forges are littered with the remains of sorcerers who overestimated their abilities. The crews who operate alongside Daemon engines in battle face unique challenges. Chaos Space Marines and cultists who fight near these abominations must deal with the Daemon's aura, affecting their own mental state. The more fanatical embrace this, seeing the Daemon's rage as a blessing that enhances their own fury. Others develop coping mechanisms, mantras or rituals that help them maintain mental focus despite the psychic pressure. The smartest learn to stay out of melee range of their own Daemon engines, understanding that an awakened Daemon doesn't distinguish carefully between targets. Cultists suffer worst of all. Without the augmentations and conditioning of Space Marines, mortal followers of chaos exposed to Daemon engines often succumb quickly to madness or possession. Some throw themselves at the engines in acts of worship, offering themselves as sacrifices to entities that care nothing for their devotion. Others flee in terror, their faith broken by proximity to something that even chaos worshippers recognize as profoundly wrong. The survivors often bear psychological scars that never heal, their minds permanently marked by exposure to such concentrated warp presence. The victims of Daemon engines suffer deaths that are often mercifully quick, but sometimes horrifyingly slow. Those caught beneath the treads of a Lord of Skulls are crushed instantly, their deaths so swift they likely feel nothing. Those sprayed by a Plagueburst crawler's mortars die over hours, or days as Nurgle's plagues consume them from within. Those struck by a Forgefiend's ectoplasma weapons sometimes survive the initial hit only to find their bodies slowly transforming into something else, as warp energy rewrites their biology at the cellular level. Some victims are captured by Daemon engines for purposes beyond simple killing. Daemon engines of Khorne will sometimes gather skulls from their victims, adding them to the offerings that adorn their hulls. Nurglite engines might take living victims and incorporate them into their structure. The unfortunate souls slowly assimilated into the Daemon engine's corrupted systems. Tenchian engines have been observed capturing psychers for unknown purposes, possibly using their psychic potential to fuel sorcerous experiments or to strengthen the Daemon's binding. The human cost of Daemon engines extends even to those who never directly encounter them. Entire populations of Forge worlds dedicated to Daemon engine construction suffer under brutal conditions, their lives spent fueling the dark industry that creates these abominations. Workers are exposed to warp energies and toxic materials that would be considered unacceptable even by the harsh standards of Imperial manufacturing. Life expectancy is measured in months, and replacement workers are gathered through slave raids on nearby systems. This is the shadow side of Daemon engines, the suffering that surrounds their creation and operation. For every Daemon engine that rampages across a battlefield, destroying enemy forces and spreading terror, There are thousands of mortals whose lives have been consumed by these machines. Weapon slaves reduced to living components. Machine thralls working themselves to death in service to things that hate them. Victims dying in countless horrible ways. And all of it serving to keep the Daemon engines operational, ready to awaken and kill again and again, until they are finally destroyed or the galaxy itself ends. The art of destruction destroying a Daemon engine requires more than simply inflicting damage until the machine ceases to function. Unlike conventional vehicles that can be disabled through the destruction of specific components or systems, a Daemon engine remains dangerous as long as the Daemon within maintains its hold on the material realm. This fundamental difference requires Imperial forces to develop specialized tactics and strategies for combating these abominations. The first challenge any force faces when engaging Daemon engines is identifying them as such. At a distance, particularly through the smoke and chaos of battle, a Daemon engine might initially be mistaken for a corrupted Imperial vehicle or some Xeno's war machine. This mistake can be fatal, as tactics effective against normal vehicles often prove inadequate against Daemon engines. Imperial doctrine now mandates that forces encountering Chaos armor attempt to identify the presence of Daemon engines as quickly as possible, looking for telltale signs like the aura of wrongness, the organic movement patterns, or the distinctive warp phenomena that surround these machines. Once identified, the standard approach is to concentrate overwhelming firepower on individual Daemon engines, rather than spreading attacks across multiple targets. This doctrine stems from hard-earned experience. A Daemon engine that has taken 50% damage is often just as effective as an undamaged one. The Daemons will compensating for mechanical failures. But a Daemon engine whose physical form has been damaged beyond the Daemon's ability to animate is truly neutralized. The entity banished back to the warp, and the machine reduced to scrap. Heavy weapons prove most effective against Daemon engines, though even these show varying degrees of success. Lascannons and plasma weapons can pierce Daemon engine armor, but they must strike multiple times to inflict enough cumulative damage. Meltagons work better. They're short-range fusion beams capable of liquefying the metal and ceramite that comprises the Daemon engine structure. However, getting close enough to use meltagons against a Daemon engine is extremely dangerous, requiring troops to brave the machine's defensive weapons and the psychic pressure of the Daemon's presence. Artillery provides a safer option, allowing Imperial forces to engage Daemon engines from beyond the range of most Daemon engine weapons. Basilisk cannons and other long-range bombardment weapons can rain shells down on Daemon engines, each impact weakening the physical structure. The challenge here is accuracy and coordination. A single artillery shell, even a direct hit, rarely inflicts sufficient damage to stop a Daemon engine. Sustained bombardment is necessary, requiring multiple artillery pieces to concentrate fire on a single target, while that target is actively trying to reach and destroy them. Orbital bombardment represents the ultimate expression of long-range firepower, and it is one of the few methods that can reliably destroy Daemon engines. A lance strike from orbit or a torpedo impact will obliterate even the most heavily armored Daemon engine, reducing it to a crater and scattered debris. However, orbital support is not always available, and the devastation caused by such weapons makes them unsuitable for use in close-quarters combat or when friendly forces are nearby. The Adeptus Astartes employ different tactics than Imperial Guard forces, their superior mobility and individual firepower allowing for more aggressive approaches. Devastator squads equipped with heavy weapons will attempt to establish firing positions with clear lines of sight to Daemon engines, then concentrate their fire in coordinated volleys. The hope is to inflict enough damage in a short period that the Daemon cannot compensate through force of will alone. Assault Marines sometimes attempt boarding actions, using their jump packs to land directly on Daemon engines and place melter bombs at key junctions. This is extremely dangerous work. The Space Marines must first survive the Daemon engine's point defense weapons and the psychic pressure of proximity. Then they must maintain their position on a surface that might be deliberately trying to throw them off. or might simply collapse beneath them as the Daemon reshapes its armor. Finally, they must place their charges and escape before detonation, all while the Daemon engine is actively trying to kill them. Some chapter tactics manuals recommend a different approach: entirely ignore the Daemon engines and destroy their supporting forces. A Daemon engine alone on a battlefield is dangerous but limited. It cannot hold ground, cannot perform complex maneuvers, cannot achieve strategic objectives beyond simple destruction. By destroying the Chaos Space Marines and cultists operating alongside Daemon engines, Imperial forces can sometimes isolate these machines and then either destroy them with concentrated fire or simply withdraw, denying the enemy their intended targets. This tactic has its own risks. A Daemon engine that has lost all friendly forces in its vicinity will not simply deactivate or withdraw. Instead, it will often go berserk, attacking anything that moves with even greater fury than before. Some Daemon engines in this state have rampaged for days, destroying everything they encounter until finally hunted down and destroyed or banished. Others have simply vanished. Whether through warp rift or through retreating to Chios, held territory is often unclear. Psychic attacks represent a completely different approach to combating Daemon engines. A powerful Psyker can attempt to assault the Daemon directly, attacking its consciousness rather than its physical form. This is extremely dangerous for the Psyker. The Daemon is, in many ways, stronger in the psychic realm than the physical, and it can fight back against mental attacks with brutal effectiveness. Psykers who have attempted to banish Daemon engines report feeling the Daemon's rage directed at them personally, a concentrated beam of hatred that can burn through psychic defenses and damage the Psyker's mind or soul. Grey Knights, the Imperium's Daemon hunting specialists, have developed specific protocols for dealing with Daemon engines. Their force weapons can harm the Daemon component directly, bypassing much of the machine's physical armor. Their psychic abilities allow them to perceive the binding runes and control systems, potentially disrupting these to weaken the Daemon's hold. Most importantly, their training and equipment provide some protection against the Daemon's psychological effects, allowing them to fight at close range without succumbing to terror or madness. A Grey Knight strike team engaging a Daemon engine will typically approach from multiple angles, using their teleportation capabilities to appear in positions that allow them to surround the machine. They coordinate their attacks to strike simultaneously at the binding points they can psychically perceive, attempting to disrupt the Daemon's connection to the physical form. This requires precise timing and communication, as a failed attempt often results in the Daemon engine focusing its fury on the Grey Knights with terrible results. The Inquisition has developed its own methods for dealing with Daemon engines, typically involving extensive preparation and specific knowledge of the target. Inquisitors studying Daemon engines have documented the binding runes and patterns used by different warpsmiths, creating databases of this forbidden knowledge. When time and circumstances permit, an Inquisitor can analyze a Daemon engine, identify its specific binding pattern, and then direct attacks at the precise points that will most effectively disrupt those bindings. This approach requires the Daemon engine to be stationary, or at least predictable in its movements, which is rarely the case in active combat. More often, Inquisitors use this knowledge to prepare battlefield defenses, setting up kill zones with overlapping fields of fire designed to damage Daemon engines in specific patterns. The results can be impressive when everything works correctly, Daemon engines advancing into carefully prepared positions and being torn apart by precisely directed fire before they can close to effective range. However, all these tactics share a common limitation: they assume the Daemon engine behaves in predictable ways. The reality is that Daemon engines, driven by actual daemonic intelligence rather than machine logic, can and do adapt to Imperial tactics. A Daemon engine that survives one battle learns from the experience. The next time it encounters similar tactics, it might respond differently, avoiding kill zones or prioritizing different targets. This learning capability makes Daemon engines increasingly dangerous over time, each battlefield survival making them more effective. Some Imperial commanders have experimented with psychological warfare against Daemon engines, attempting to use the Daemon's own nature against it. By creating tempting targets or setting up situations that appeal to the Daemon's particular hunger, they hope to lure Daemon engines into disadvantageous positions. This can work, but it requires intimate knowledge of daemonic psychology and carries significant risk. The bait must be convincing enough to attract the Daemon engine, but not so valuable that losing it outweighs the benefit of destroying the engine. The ultimate truth about fighting Daemon engines is that there are no perfect solutions, only varying degrees of terrible options. Every engagement with these abominations costs lives and resources far beyond what would be required to destroy a comparable conventional vehicle. The psychological toll on surviving soldiers is severe. The risk of catastrophic failure, where a Daemon engine breaks through Imperial lines and wreaks havoc on rear areas, is always present, and even successful engagements leave behind corruption and warp contamination that requires inquisitorial intervention to cleanse. This is why the Imperium's doctrine regarding Daemon engines emphasizes prevention over cure. Better to destroy the forge, worlds and hellforges that create these abominations than to face them on the battlefield. Better to eliminate warpsmiths and sorcerers before they can complete binding rituals than to fight the results of their labor. Better to deny chaos the resources needed to construct Daemon engines than to destroy them after construction. But prevention is not always possible, and so Imperial forces must stand ready to face these horrors, knowing that every battle against Daemon engines pushes both body and soul to their limits. Echoes of damnation throughout the grim annals of Imperial history. Certain Daemon engines have distinguished themselves through acts of destruction so terrible that they enter legend. These are not merely powerful war machines, but individual entities whose campaigns have left scars across entire sectors. Understanding these specific instances provides insight into what Daemon engines are capable of when fully unleashed. The Iron Beast of Amethel serves as a particularly well-documented example. This Molofiant fought as part of the Crimson Slaughter Army during the Daemon campaign in 999, Emdrin 4-1, and its rampage through the planet's defenses demonstrated the terrifying capabilities of these engines. The Iron Beast was distinguished by its unusual aggression, even by Molofian standards. The Daemon within seemed to take particular pleasure in dismantling fortifications, as if the act of destruction satisfied something beyond simple bloodlust. Imperial records describe the Iron Beast scaling the walls of Fortress Daemon, its claws finding purchase on supposedly smooth adamantium surfaces. Once atop the walls, it proceeded to methodically tear apart every weapon emplacement and defensive position it encountered. Garrison troops attempting to stop it with small arms, fire might as well have been throwing stones. The few heavy weapons that scored hits inflicted visible damage, but the Iron Beast continued its rampage regardless, driven by the Daemon's fury. What made the Iron Beast particularly noteworthy was its apparent intelligence in targeting structural weak points. Rather than simply destroying whatever it encountered, the Daemon engine seemed to understand architecture well enough to strike at load, bearing supports and critical junctions. Several sections of Fortress Daemon's walls collapsed, not because the Iron Beast destroyed them directly, but because it had weakened their structural integrity through selective demolition. This suggested the Daemon within possessed knowledge beyond simple violence, perhaps memories from its existence in the warp, or information gleaned from previous battles. The Iron Beast was eventually destroyed through a coordinated assault by an entire company of Imperial Guards supported by Space Marine artillery, but not before it had killed hundreds and reduced a significant portion of Fortress Daemon's defenses to rubble. The wreckage of the Daemon engine was ordered sealed in blessed containers and transported off-world for study by the Inquisition. Whether any useful knowledge was gained from this study remains classified, but the incident established protocols for dealing with unusually dangerous Daemon engines. Other notable Daemon engines have left their marks across the galaxy. The records speak of a Lord of Skulls designated as the Eightfold Fury, that led a cornate warband through 3 sectors over the course of 5 years, its rampage only ending when it was destroyed by a full space marine company supported by Titan support. The Fury was distinguished by the Bloodthirster, within being of the 8th rank, one of those rare entities that views Daemon engine imprisonment not as captivity, but as opportunity. This perspective made the Fury extraordinarily effective, its attacks showing tactical acumen beyond what most Daemon engines display. A plagueburst crawler known as Grandfather's Gift earned infamy during Mortarion's plague wars against Ultramar. This particular Daemon engine demonstrated what happens when Nurgle's engines are given time to saturate an area with their plagues. Grandfather's Gift would position itself at range and maintain sustained bombardment of a single target area for hours or even days, its mortar firing with mechanical regularity. The spore clouds it released didn't disperse, but instead accumulated, creating zones where the very air was so saturated with disease that unprotected humans died within minutes, and even armored troops succumbed after extended exposure. The Daemon within Grandfather's Gift seemed to take satisfaction in watching entire populations succumb to plague, though whether this represents true emotion or simply the Daemon's nature aligned with Nurgle's will is debatable. Imperial forces eventually destroyed the engine through orbital bombardment, but the areas it had saturated remained plague zones for years afterward, requiring extensive quarantine and eventually viral bombing to cleanse. Helldrakes have produced several individual specimens of note, their aerial dominance making them particularly dangerous and memorable. One such engine, referred to in Imperial records only as the Crimson Drake, terrorized shipping lanes in the Gothic sector for over a decade. Unlike most Daemon engines that are deployed as part of larger forces, the Crimson Drake operated independently, attacking merchant vessels and small military patrols before disappearing into the void. Its habit of clinging to the hulls of ships it attacked, using them as temporary nests while feeding on their power, earned it a reputation that made some shipping lanes effectively unusable without heavy escort. The Crimson Drake's eventual destruction came not through military action, but through treachery within Chaos ranks. Accounts suggest a rival warband, growing tired of the Drake's independent operations and the attention it brought from Imperial forces, deliberately lured it into an ambush where multiple Imperial Navy vessels were waiting. The Drake was destroyed in the engagement, though 3 Imperial ships were lost in the process. Whether the Daemon within was genuinely destroyed or merely banished back to the warp remains unknown. These individual examples illustrate patterns that emerge when studying Daemon engine deployment across multiple campaigns. First, Daemon engines tend to become more effective over time if they survive multiple engagements. The accumulated experience, whether this represents the Daemon learning or simply the machine, body being modified and improved between battles, makes veteran Daemon engines significantly more dangerous than newly created ones. Second, Daemon engines left unsupported often develop increasingly erratic behavior patterns. Without warpsmiths and sorcerers to maintain their bindings and control systems, the Daemon within gradually gains more freedom to act on its own desires. This can manifest as the engine going rogue and attacking indiscriminately, or sometimes as the Daemon finding ways to enhance its own capabilities through warp manipulation of its machine body. Third, the destruction of Daemon engines rarely results in permanent elimination of the threat. The Daemon itself, being an immortal warp entity, is merely banished when its machine body is destroyed. Given time and the right circumstances, the same Daemon might be bound into a new engine and return to plague Imperial forces. Some particularly powerful or notorious Daemons have been bound into multiple engines over the centuries, each incarnation bringing accumulated knowledge of Imperial tactics and weaknesses. The Inquisition maintains classified records of Daemon engines that have appeared in multiple conflicts across different time periods, suggesting the same entities being repeatedly bound. One such file references a Daemon that has been bound into Defiler pattern engines at least 7 times over a 1,000-year period, each time returning with what appears to be memory of previous engagements. This particular entity has demonstrated increasing tactical sophistication with each incarnation, suggesting it retains knowledge from its previous imprisonments. These records also document rare instances of Daemon engines escaping from their bindings entirely, the Daemon breaking free of its machine, prison and manifesting in real space in its true form. Such events are catastrophic, as a Daemon powerful enough to maintain the binding of a Daemon engine is typically a greater Daemon, or at least a very powerful lesser Daemon. These entities, freed from their mechanical prisons, can cause devastation far beyond what they accomplished while bound. The fact that this escape is possible makes Daemon engines dangerous even in destruction, as the moment of the machine body's death is when the bindings are weakest. The patterns that emerge from studying Daemon engine deployments across multiple campaigns paint a disturbing picture. These machines are not just weapons, but ongoing threats that persist across decades or even centuries. Each destruction is temporary. Each banishment merely delays the inevitable return. And with each iteration, with each new binding, the Daemon within grows more knowledgeable about the material realm and more effective at using its prison body to inflict harm. This persistence makes Daemon engines a strategic concern beyond their tactical impact. A world that has faced Daemon engines once must prepare for the possibility they will return. Fortifications destroyed must be rebuilt stronger. Tactics that failed must be revised. And always, there is the knowledge that somewhere in the warp, the Daemon that powered that engine still exists, still remembers, still hates, and will almost certainly return in some form at some future time. The dark truth understanding what happens when a Daemon engine awakens leads us to a fundamental truth about the Warhammer 40 Zarozan universe that bears contemplation. These machines represent more than just weapons of war or examples of heretical technology. They embody one of the core themes that makes the setting so distinctively grimdark: the idea that some solutions to problems create worse problems than they solve. From the perspective of chaos forces, Daemon engines seem like perfect weapons. They combine the firepower and armor of vehicles with the implacability and hatred of daemons. They require no crews, need no morale boosting, will never retreat or surrender. They are violence distilled into metal form, hatred given weapons and armor. But this perfection comes at a terrible cost. And that cost is paid not just by the Daemon engine's victims, but by everyone involved in their creation and deployment. The Daemon trapped within hates its captors as much as it hates their enemies. The weapon, slaves suffer fates arguably worse than death. The machine, thralls risk their lives constantly maintaining engines that would gladly kill them. The warpsmiths who create these abominations must always watch for the moment when their creations turn on them. Even the Chaos Space Marines, who fight alongside Daemon engines, know that these machines might massacre them as readily as they massacre Imperial forces. This creates a situation where everyone involved in Daemon engine operations is in some sense a victim. The Daemon is a prisoner. The slaves are trapped. The maintainers live in fear. The operators face constant danger. Only perhaps the most fanatical devotees of chaos see this state of affairs as desirable. And even they must harbor some awareness that they are wielding weapons that hate them. This mutual suffering and hatred is what makes Daemon engines so perfectly emblematic of chaos itself. Chaos promises power but delivers corruption. It offers strength but demands sacrifice. It provides weapons, but those weapons might turn on their wielders at any moment. The Daemon engine is all of this condensed into a single war machine, a perfect metaphor for the self-destructive nature of chaos worship. From the Imperial perspective, Daemon engines represent a different kind of nightmare. They are proof that the enemy has access to technologies and powers that the Imperium cannot match or counter through conventional means. Every engagement with Daemon engines forces Imperial commanders to commit resources far beyond what would be required for comparable conventional threats. Every battle leaves behind corruption that must be cleansed. Every soldier who survives carries psychological scars that never fully heal. The Imperium's response to this has been to classify knowledge of Daemon engines at the highest levels, sharing tactical information on a need to no basis while keeping the deeper truths about their nature restricted to the Inquisition and certain elements of the Adeptus Astartes. This secrecy serves multiple purposes. It prevents widespread panic about the true nature of what Imperial forces face. It limits the spread of corrupting knowledge about Daemon binding. And it maintains the fiction that the Imperium is winning the long war against Chaos, even when evidence suggests otherwise. But this secrecy also means that many Imperial commanders face Daemon engines without truly understanding what they are fighting. They see powerful enemy vehicles and employ anti-armor tactics that prove inadequate. They don't understand why these machines seem to ignore damage or why their crews suffer psychological effects from proximity. This ignorance costs lives, but the alternative, educating every Imperial officer about the true nature of Daemon engines, would require sharing knowledge that might itself prove corrupting. The existence of Daemon engines also raises uncomfortable questions about the nature of the machine spirits that the Mechanicus venerates. If a Daemon can be bound into a machine and animate it with malevolent intelligence, what exactly is the machine spirit that inhabits Imperial vehicles? The Mechanicus would deny any comparison, insisting that machine spirits are fundamentally different from daemonic possession. But the parallels are obvious to anyone who has witnessed both, and this creates a theological tension that the Imperium would prefer not to examine too closely. Some within the Inquisition have theorized that Daemon engines and the Mechanicus's machine spirits might be related phenomena, both representing non-material entities given form through technology. This theory is considered extremely dangerous heresy, as it suggests that the Mechanicus's worship of the Omnissiah might share more with Chaos worship than either party would care to admit. Those who pursue this line of thought too publicly tend to suffer unfortunate accidents. The persistent nature of Daemon engines across millennia also speaks to a larger truth about the setting. The Imperium is not winning. Chaos is not being defeated. The long war is not coming to an end. Daemon engines destroyed in one century return in the next, bound to new machine, bodies by warpsmiths who learned their craft from those who came before. The knowledge of how to create these abominations persists across generations of Chaos forces, passed down and refined and improved. This suggests a level of organization and continuity among Chaos forces that Imperial propaganda would prefer to deny. Chaos is not merely mindless destruction and random violence. It is also careful planning and accumulated knowledge. The Daemon engines are proof of this. Each one represents weeks or months of preparation, requiring specialists to coordinate their efforts, resources to be gathered, sacrifices to be made. This is not the work of savage raiders, but of a sophisticated enemy with long-term goals and the patience to achieve them. For readers of the lore, Daemon engines serve as a perfect lens through which to view the essential nature of Warhammer 40,000. This is a universe where technology and sorcery blend seamlessly, where the greatest weapons are also the greatest horrors, where every faction is fighting battles they cannot truly win, only delay losing. The awakening of a Daemon engine is a microcosm of the setting itself, reality tearing, hatred manifesting, violence unleashed, and suffering spread indiscriminately across all involved. The next time you see a Daemon engine model on a tabletop, or read about one in the lore, remember what it represents. Not just a powerful unit or an impressive miniature, but a concentration of suffering and hatred so intense it warps reality around itself. Remember the Daemon screaming in its prison body, the weapons, slaves reduced to living components, the machine, thralls risking death with every maintenance cycle, the victims torn apart by weapons that hunger for their destruction. Remember that this is not a weapon that anyone truly controls, only a weapon that is aimed at the enemy in the hope it kills them before it turns on its supposed masters. This is what makes Daemon engines such a perfect expression of the grimdark aesthetic. There are no good options. There are no clean solutions. There is only suffering in different forms, hatred in different expressions, damnation in different packages. The awakening of a Daemon engine is not the activation of a weapon. It is the opening of a wound in reality through which hatred pours like poison, corrupting and destroying everything it touches until it is sealed again by destruction or banishment, only to be reopened elsewhere at some future time. If you found this deep dive into the horrifying reality of Daemon engines fascinating, please consider liking this video and subscribing to Stories of Hammer. We explore the darkest corners of the Warhammer 40,000 universe, bringing you detailed examinations of the lore that makes this setting so uniquely grimdark. From the greatest heroes to the most terrible horrors, from the smallest details to the grandest conflicts, we're here to explore it all with the depth and attention it deserves. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode, and let us know in the comments what dark corner of the 40K universe you'd like us to explore next. The galaxy is vast, the horrors are endless, and there's always more to discover in the grim darkness of the far future.